types of modifications using visual supports help in a learning environment as well. There's also literature in other disciplines, not physical education, but English, language arts, education. Academic school day transition times are really hard for kids with autism, meaning when they move from math class to whatever class, that can be a really difficult time for them, but the visual supports help with that. So there are ways to help these kids stay focused. It's a matter of implementing them and implementing them in a way that's really helpful. So things that I've tried to do keeping this in mind is that there's other types of visual supports besides these little picture cards that can be useful. For one of the classes that I teach, I require all my students to write what's called a social story, which is a visual picture explaining to someone. You must have experience with autism because you've nodded at like everything I've said. So these stories have a lot of pictures, and they're usually about 15 PowerPoint slides, and each slide has a sentence on it that tells you why you do something the way that you do it. And there is an abundance of these social stories out there that are about like table manners and waiting in line and crossing the street, but there's really limited stuff for physical education related things. So I make my students write them, and then provided that they follow the instructions reasonably well, I post them on the internet, and I give credit to my students for doing that, but they're on the internet as a resource so that people that are Googling, you know, how do I teach a kid with autism how to dive in the swimming pool? My students have created how to do these. Some of them are better than others, but it's a resource that presently there's nothing out there other than what you can find or what you can create. And classroom teachers don't have time. Physical education teachers don't have time to create a social story for every activity. So, you know, over the course of several semesters, I think there's like 60 now on the internet that my students have built. But eventually, if we project out that I potentially will be working until I'm 116 to retire, that I have at least 80 more years of students that could build things like this. But I mean, I think the other important thing to remember is that, like, you know, when we can use pictures, we should. That videos would be an interesting thing to look at in the future. So especially now that iPads are so easy, so inexpensive, there's so much video editing software that's inexpensive to use. It would be interesting to see, would videos be more helpful than pictures? And typically, I have colleagues that have looked at this with typically developing populations, and they actually, I think what they found is that there is an age effect for videos, that older children will respond really well to being given a video and then being told to do whatever's in the video, but that younger children seem to need the motivation of an adult, like, yay, you did a good job. So there seems to be an age effect for that, but it would be interesting because I don't think they've looked at it in populations of children with autism. It'd be interesting to do that. There's some more things I have to think about how I would want to implement a study like this, because presently most of my guys that I work with in my after-school program, the iPad is a reward for them that they work for, and I don't think that they would respond very positively to having to use the iPad for work instead of the video game that they like to play as a reward. So that would be something that I would need to conceptualize more, but it would be interesting to see how we could do that. And then also to keep in mind, this very individualized approach is really, really important in a physical education setting and a physical activity setting as well. So I mentioned this after-school program that I've been involved with, but for the last 2 years, that's been predominantly my way of working within the population of individuals with autism. I found a school in Philadelphia that was willing to let me come and bring students. My students are taking a class where we spend the first couple of weeks of the semester learning about autism, what to expect, what I expect of you in the community-based setting, what our best practice educational approaches for working with kids with autism. So we train them up, and then I take them to the schools, and they actually run the stations and work one-to-one with the children with autism enrolled in the program for 90 minutes, 1 day a week. We go to the elementary school, 1 day a week I go to the high school. So I'm working with kids this semester between the ages of 5 and 21 years old. because you can be in special education services until you're 21 years old in the United States, so the high school is 14 to 21-year-olds. It's been really, really fun. Every semester something different is interesting to me. Lately I've been really interested in the professional development that my students are experiencing. One day I would like to collect data with this group, but I'm presently in a teaching role. I teach a 4-4 academic load, and I don't really have any resources to support doing research. So I've not yet been able to collect much data. I would like to collect some physical activity related data to see what's happening with these kids, because the parents are reporting that they love what they call Temple Tuesdays and Temple Wednesdays, because on Temple Tuesdays and Temple Wednesdays, the kids with autism go to sleep much faster and sleep much harder, more restfully. I'm not sure what exactly the descriptor word would be best for this, but I'd be interested to see like what is happening in terms of their physical activity levels. I'm interested also to know, and this is a curiosity thing, the next day at school, do they have fewer behavioral outbursts? These are things I would like to do, but logistically have proven difficult thus far in my current role. I actually have a student this semester that's working with me. We're going to look at another piece of this communication with children with autism and looking at assessments. I mentioned that there's a newer version of it, one of the assessments. We're going to use that and kind of further clarify what piece of communication is most important for kids with autism. The goal was to collect that data in December. Unfortunately, my research assistant has mono, and as a 5.5 months pregnant woman, I was like, get out of my office. I understand how mono is transmitted, but you can stay over there anyways. So the new goal is that we will submit the IRB, and then perhaps maybe if everything goes well with the IRB, collect the data before I deliver this baby, and or after I come back from maternity leave, we'll collect the data because she's interested in learning more and wants to be a occupational therapist or something, so wants this experience. So that is a short-term research goal that I have that I think is attainable. The measuring of the physical activity piece is a little bit more challenging. I have some colleagues that are willing to loan me activity monitoring devices, but I have to write the IRB and get all of that approved. And lately, my free time has been investigating daycares in which stroller is best, which is slightly different than what it was 6 months ago. So there's that piece. And I guess kind of what this means for being here on a job interview. I just mentioned these two ideas that I have. If I were to stay in Philadelphia, these are the two things that I want to do next. But as I'm here and I'm imagining, uprooting and moving elsewhere, I kind of like this idea of there's like a parable that there's like a couple of blindfolded men and they're asked to describe what they feel, and the one person describes a fan and the other person describes a snake and the other person describes a spear and somebody else describes a tree trunk, and they're all talking about the elephants. They're all talking about the same thing, but from where they're looking at is very different. And I guess it's kind of the best way I can think to end this research talk, given the work that I'm currently doing and the expectations of my current job and the question mark of what would I do if I were not there. I spent the morning talking with really, really interesting, exciting people. Dana Dunn and Cheryl Lovelady and Jim Eddy and Terry Shelton. And there's so many exciting things happening here, and I got really excited talking with them about a lot of different things that are going on here. There's a Beyond Academics program that works with people with intellectual disabilities and integrates them in the community, and I was like, oh, well, we could do my after-school program with them, and there's early childhood networks, and it's kind of been interesting because I've been meeting one-to-one with these people thus far, so I'm very excited that I'm here meeting all of you and learning from you, and it's kind of still wrapping my head around what would it be like to be here, because so much of community-based work requires actually being in the community that it was difficult to really conceptualize. If I were to show up here tomorrow, what would be my next steps? I would say my next steps for the first year of employment here would be get myself connected in the community and understand how UNCG works and really help work on this online doctorate program, particularly the advising piece that I know everyone is concerned with. And so I kind of think about all that for the first year, and then the second year would be when I would really want to be potentially collecting data and implementing things related to my research line. But this position is exciting because it allows both that piece related to educational technologies and online learning and research. And so I'm very excited about that, but it also is why I kind of leave it with this parable of, I don't know what part of the elephant I want to do next, but I'm excited that there's an elephant in front of me and that I'm given the chance to try. So I leave it at that, and these are some important collaborators of mine. Mary Rudisil was my advisor in graduate school. Ting Liu has been spectacular as a collaborator. She's in Texas. She collects data and then asks me to help her write it up and invites me all the time to come help her collect data, and that's wonderful. And then these are some of my students that have helped me launch the after-school program and be involved with that. And the middle collaborator in the pink, she's actually my colleague at Temple, and she's the director of athletic training education. So I'll be working with her very closely in the next few weeks on her clinical doctorate in athletic training. So that these are the people that I feel like have been most helpful to getting me to at least interview here. But thank you to all of you for coming. Do you have any questions or thoughts? Do you mind if I sit down?
Please.
Okay. I'm sorry, it'll be harder to look you in the eye.
No, don't worry.
But sitting down would be really helpful right now. Thank you.
Questions?
Casey, can you say something about the moderating that I saw on your Vita? Something about moderating Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. And I think it was listed in service, which I've never seen before. And I'm just curious, what are you doing when you're moderating? Does it relate to your research? Does it relate to your teaching?
So, actually, I meant to tell you about this because you asked Jane Harris about wearable technologies. So I think I have a Pinterest board about wearable technologies. So about a year and a half ago, when I was asked would I be willing to manage social media for my department, was where this started. And then it evolved to, and then troubleshoot other ways technology can solve these problems for our department, including, and then there was a laundry list of weird issues that I'm sure everyone has departmentally. So I said, okay, but I can't do this on top of my regular job, take away a class and I'll think about doing it. So I've had a one course release for the last year and a half we call it the digital strategy coordinator role, which is a fancy way of saying, think about how digital technologies can solve strategic problems. So I run the @TempleCanese Twitter, which for the most part is I think of goofy tweets to send, good luck on your midterms, and things like that. But the part about moderating that probably needs to be mentioned is when you, we want to use social media, and we chose Twitter because that's what our students are using. What we are realizing is that our students are using Twitter in a different way than we originally intended. And how this has manifested particularly in an interesting way is, I guess the first semester that I was doing this, a student had been dating someone. They broke up. The ex was not happy, decided to start tweeting at organizations that was important to the student. Tweeting not nice things, tweeting things involving sexual behaviors that I don't need to know about. And so they decided to start tweeting at our Twitter account at work about that and saying so-and-so student's name is posing for pornographic pictures, or I don't even remember what it was, but I took one look at this and I was like, it's not my job for student safety, but as an agent of the university, if I know that a student is being harassed and I do nothing about it, there seems to be some liability here. So what that resulted in was I have a friend who happens to be the Title IX coordinator at a small private liberal arts school in Philadelphia that has a really terrible situation with how women were treated with relationships to sexual assaults. So I called her and I said, hypothetically, if a situation like this emerged, what office do I even call to report that this happened? So I've since learned how to handle that. And it resulted in I got to spend time with campus police. The campus police then approached the student and ensured that her physical safety was intact. I think the student was mortified when it happened, and it was also finals week, so it was a really great time for a student to have something like this happen. But the student has since reached out and said, like, I'm grateful that, and our students are adult learners, but I think the moral of the email was, I'm grateful that an adult stepped in and did what needed to be done, because I was trying to ignore it and I was trying to do these things and make it go away, and it wasn't going away. So that's one thing. At the beginning of this school year, a student got mad about something related to registration and started, the expression that is often used is Twitter trolling, where they just are relentless with sending tweets. And this particular student was implying that there were certain federal laws that were not being complied with by my department. And so this, when we say moderating, this is the kind of thing that when this latest incident was happening, I was like, this blows up really bad, in a really bad way, if they start tweeting at news organizations that we're not accommodating federal laws here. So it's kind of like a screaming newborn baby, in that all of a sudden it demands immediate attention. So I did that. Our Pinterest boards, I probably should have thought that you might ask this and looked at it, but I think there's 1,300 pins and 41 different boards. Thinking about what our faculty are interested in, thinking about what their research interests are, thinking about what their expertises are. We've curated boards for a lot of those ideas. And when I say we, it's been me, recognizing that someone is a concussion expert and then finding cool stuff on the internet about concussions, tagging it to this Pinterest board, which it's like a bulletin board for images on the internet, predominantly used by people to find recipes, Halloween costumes, and weird craft ideas. But we're trying to use it from an educational perspective. So we did that. We also have a board that's about like why majoring in kinesiology, like what's special about Temple University's kinesiology program, all those kinds of things. And you know, when we think about, and Jim Andy gave me a handout, and this was on it, but there's providing quality online education, and there's also providing marketing that suggests that you're using quality online education. So that ensures that you're using appropriate design principles that suggest that your website has been updated recently. It's also making sure that the information on the website is updated and current, but it's also using these social media tools that show that you're relevant to what's currently going on in technology-related initiatives. And so that's kind of what that is in a nutshell. I don't really know where else to put it besides as a service-related thing, because I'm not using it in the classroom to assess student learning. I'm not asking students to do it. I am putting their work on slideshare.net, which I think is awesome and a great tool to share your expertise with the world. But it really, the way that I've been doing it at Temple has been more service-related. So I hope that answers your question.
It's just really helpful, because I imagine that it would be a complicated response, because it occurs to me that you imagine an audience for those things, but your audience isn't just your students.
No.
As soon as you're using those platforms, your audience is the world.
Right, right.
And so you
And
have to think about what that means.
And that was why the day that the Twitter troll thing was happening, saying that we weren't complying with federal law, it involved an adjunct taught physical activity course, which we offer. There's 2,000 students taking our physical activity courses at any given semester. We have like 65 plus instructors. We're in the process of hiring a new coordinator of of the physical activity class program. So I couldn't even be like, hey, Dr. Carper, you're in charge of this. Who teaches this class? Because there was no Dr. Carper at that moment in that role. And I think I'd walked out of my doctor's office having just like looked at a picture of my baby to like, you have 17 Twitter notifications about work. And I also don't have that, I don't really have that training about how to handle crisis on social media. So again, when you think about that previous incident where it's like, I'm an agent of the university, I need to tell someone, I've learned who to tell from that. And I've also said, you know, if this role were to continue, which they're not having me do this starting in January, if that role were to continue, I needed more training about how to handle the Twitter troll incident, because it's not exactly what we originally intended. And it's not something as an academic that I have a lot of training in. It's just something I play with, and then it teaches you all these interesting tools.
Casey, one of the things that I, at least in the fields that I'm interested in, there's a real professional community.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's many overlapping communities, and I'm wondering if that could be. I'm sure there are communities already out there. For instance, when you think about the athletic training, online programming that you're developing, whether social media could be developed, whether there could be participation around that, and also training for students around that to mine that, to leverage that.
I think that would be helpful. I also know that some students have recently gotten a lecture about their social media presence, because the things that they're tweeting and the things that they're hashtagging in their tweets. So they tweet something ridiculous about their weekend, and then they hashtag Temple Kinesiology. And you're like, hello, don't tag us in your ridiculous tweet. So I think there's certainly a need for that. I teach predominantly undergrad, so I generally have this more of perspective of what goes wrong with social media as it relates to undergrads. Some of their tweets were real special, but the way that the faculty members chose to handle this problem was they screenshotted the tweets that the students had sent, and then just created a timed PowerPoint and put it up and said, I have nothing to say, and let the students read it, and then the aftermath. But I remember reading an article in the Chronicle about someone in some academic discipline, probably like anthropology, where you go and you're in a field site and you're digging bones or whatever. They do a weekly Twitter lab check-in for the people back home working at their graduate students. Everybody has to tweet what they did that week. And I was thinking about that this morning when I was talking to Dr. Eddy with respect to, as we think about these online EDD students that are getting ready to move into more self-directed learning, would that be a helpful tool? The thing about social media is it requires constant care and feeding.
Right.
And so I'd be interested more about what else is already in place, particularly if I'm thinking about the online doctorate, what else is in place already, because to implement something that requires that much care and attention may or may not be the best use of faculty time at this moment. But I'm sure that there are professional communities related to using these tools in higher education. Again, I have a 1 credit release time. This could be a full-time job easily for one person in the department. So it's not a rabbit hole I've really dove into. There's a LinkedIn group that I'm a part of that's higher education, social media, or social media and higher education. And so I'm a part of that. And sometimes there's useful discussion. Sometimes, like, look at my cool Pinterest page and other weird LinkedIn group related activities. But I think that can be helpful. I do moderate the LinkedIn group. What we're trying to do is, and I'm not sure, we didn't really talk about this at lunch today, but we're very fascinated by what happens to our students after they graduate, particularly if we're thinking about undergrads. We have 1,500 undergrads in our program at Temple. Of those 1,500, 900 are majoring in what we call kinesiology pre-health professions, which of those 900, 600 of them will tell you they're going to PT school. And they have a 1.9 GPA, and you're like, no, you're not. So we're fascinated in what happens to these kids. So we thought LinkedIn might be a good way to capture them. So we created a LinkedIn group. When I was given responsibility for it, there were 42 members. We're at 900 now. Probably, if I remember to send the email tonight to all the students, because we have an email listserv to reach all of them, I'd probably get to 1,000 by the time I fly back to Philadelphia. But we want to be able to capture that, because you can depend on the alumni office, you can do exit surveys, but they're probably going to have a LinkedIn profile, if not immediately after they graduate, within 2 to 3 years after they graduate, so we're trying to get them to join it before they disappear, and then we can see where they actually go, because it's not PT school, but I'm not sure what it is. And when we're thinking about creating new classes and new opportunities for students and thinking about internship experiences, I don't know that it's our job to do job placement, but there's gotta be a better way to work with those 300 who have absolutely no chance of going to PT school. Probably 100 of them will, and 200 of them will change their mind when they realize what they actually need to do. So I'm not sure. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about your research program and some kind of entry points to the EDD program, if there's connections between where you see your research program going and what you've learned about the EDD program and the students that are involved in that program, or you kind of envision them on more parallel tracks?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I've tried to do my due diligence on the online EDD, and Dr. Eddy and I actually talked about this morning, that, I said Dr. Brown was telling me on the drive over to meet with him that, you guys build the course content